So we've
Okay,
been starting.
we are live, Mr. Guy. We are
Yes,
live.
sir.
I'm attorney Vince Davis, and this is The Secret, How to Fight CPS and Win. I'm joined by my two co-hosts, Ms. Georgette Truen. Ms. G, good evening. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. And we have our other co-host, Mr. Darren Guay, all the way from Maine. Darren, how are you doing?
I'm excited, Mr. Davis. I'm excited. We got a good guest tonight.
We do. We have a very special guest tonight, Mr. Okori Okorocha. Um, Okori is an attorney licensed in California, but he is also an MS, a double MS. He's a forensic toxicologist with a general toxicology expert witness in a lot of cases. He's a forensic pharmacologist, general pharmacological expert witness. And here's what I'm really impressed by. He's nationally board certified civil trial lawyer. He's a nationally board certified criminal trial lawyer. He's in the top 100 of all national Black lawyers in this country. And he has his own law firm, and he also testifies as an expert, not only here in California, but I think you've done other states as well, haven't you?
Yes, the out-of-state ones are usually bigger because they don't want to fly me out for a small case.
Right. So if you want to get in touch with him, Corey, why don't you tell us what website you'd like to drive people to if they want to hire you for expert services?
They can go to www.oesq.com. So phonetically, that would be www.oscar.echo.sierra.quebec.com.
Okay, very good. And do they have you have a telephone number they could also reach you at?
310-497-0321.
Okay, and we'll post those on all the platforms. We're streaming to about 8 different platforms right now. And let's start off the questioning. So, Corey, with respect to CPS, in a lot of cases, drug testing is ordered or requested of the parents. And a lot of parents lose their children because of drug tests coming up, quote unquote, positive. What is the number one thing a parent should know when they're going to take a drug test for the court or for CPS?
So the testing, the most important thing to know is there's 2 kinds of tests in analytical chemistry. The first one is a screening test, which has a ton of false positives. Then you have a confirmation test, which is generally specific to that particular drug or alcohol. The issues we run into, like when I work for the Orange County Public Defender's Office, who defends these sort of things, the kids are often taken away based on a screening test. And in every forensic textbook that addresses the issue, it says no scientist should ever go into court and say something was present based solely on a screening test. But in Orange County, they're taking kids away based on a screening test, which it's not really something that it doesn't hold. It's not sufficient. For example, if you had 100 samples from 100 different people you were testing for drugs, the screening test would be used to determine which ones might be positive, and then you would test those on your confirmatory method, which is way more expensive, takes way more time, and way more resources. So it's a screening just to see what needs testing. But the Orange County ones they use are the same as people who are stopped by the police, have drugs in their system, and they put them in the drugs in a narco patch to see if they change color. Well, just about everything, there's so many things that can change color and make it seem like there's a drug there that really isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to let Miss G, she has some questions prepared, and then I'm going to follow up with some questions, and I think Darren may have some questions for you.
Okay.
Miss G?
Yes, hi. Nice meeting you, by the way.
Nice meeting you.
So that I was reading about the my goodness, about the families affected by SUD, which is substance use disorder, and how DCFS, basically what DCFS does, which they shouldn't do. First of all, they shouldn't. The child welfare workers should not simply assume the parent is using drugs, or just because it doesn't align with the parent's behavior, meaning they judge people on their behavior. So the parent is angry because their kids are being snatched, automatically they're doing drugs, right? When they go do drug testing, first of all, are you forced to do a drug test? Can you have to do a drug test, or what are your thought about that? Because oftentimes when the parent doesn't do drugs, they're automatically a positive. How is that possible?
Right. Okay. So it depends what they call it, the matrix you're testing. So blood, urine, sweat, saliva, your nails. Let's start with the sweat patch, because I think one of the guests posted a question about the sweat patch. Now, there is not a lot of scientific research behind it, but a lot of it has debunked the sweat patch that people wear, because one, they believe you never really can decontaminate it by just washing. And two, it is believed that drugs can end up under the patch, coming off the blood vessels, in your skin, and then you would get a false positive result. And so it's really not reliable for my people. I usually recommend, if it's alcohol, the remote breath testing, because that's pretty secure. But I tell everybody not to do a sweat test.
Okay. What about people who don't do methamphetamine, and what are your thoughts on that when they force them to do the drug test, and all of a sudden they have meth in their drug test and they've never done it? Then parents would leave and then do their own drug test, pay money to do their own. The same hour is negative. How can it be positive and a negative in an hour?
So in that scenario, the positive test would be a false positive. It depends how they tested it, the method they used, whether it was confirmatory or screening. Now, the other thing that makes meth tricky is there are two kinds of meth. One of them, the chemical name is dextro, DEXTRO, or D-methamphetamine. The other is levo, LEVO, or L-methamphetamine. L-methamphetamine is used in over-the-counter nasal decongestants. If you Google levo, LEVO, methamphetamine, you'll find Vicks, inhalers, and other cold preparations appearing. It's not a drug of abuse. On the other hand, the other kind of meth is either a prescription or a street drug. And I have not seen any of the labs have the correct instruments to tell the two apart, because they're almost the same. Like, for example, if I take my two hands, I can put them right on top of each other. They look exactly the same. But if I put them this way, they're completely different.
Correct.
And so you need specialized instruments to tell the two apart. The labs, in my experience, don't ever tell the two apart. And so, everybody ends up with hair or sweat patches that are positive, and they don't even know what kind of meth it is. Now, the labs that do a lot of this testing, their default position is, well, the numbers are too high for it to be, over the counter nasal decongestants. They'll say you have to do a boatload, which may be true,
Right.
but that doesn't matter because the people abusing meth are not getting the prescription, so they're not getting pharmaceutical grade methamphetamine, and the clandestine laboratory methamphetamine that people on the street buy, that is often adulterated or diluted with L-methamphetamine, so that they can get they can make more money because they're basically selling more if they dilute what they have.
Okay, so do you think so? Basically, what the CPS, their drug testing department, they use urine only, and they would just remove children just based on that, just the urine test. And is that, you said it's not really credible testing? Really, it's not really, right? Because you can't.
Now, are you talking about in cases where they're just trying to show use of the drug or
Yes.
impairment?
Use of the drugs.
Okay. So the urine is probably one of the more reliable ones to test for drug use and gives you a decent window of detection. But the drug we see the most that people allegedly test positive for is meth. And you can't even tell if it's the cold medicine or the street drug. There are also other ways that these drugs, we're just talking about sweat right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's a lot of theories. They haven't been studied that well, but sweat patches are believed by many reputable scientists to be flawed. There is one major proponent who works for the industry. He's a chemistry PhD out of Stanford. I forget his name. And he has a letter that he'll send as a form of a report in response to every case that I've seen. And so he's a big advocate for it. But a lot of times, like with hair testing, the people who are making money off the test are the biggest proponents and do the literature, which starts to look like just propaganda eventually.
But what I don't understand, okay, when they do the urine test, okay,
Mhm.
because this happened to one of our clients, and a previous attorney was handling her case. The attorney told her to go do a hair follicle test, which she paid for.
Okay.
Negative, completely negative, no drugs.
Mhm.
She did a urine test outside of the DCFS facility, completely negative, no drugs found.
Okay.
But in the DCFS facility itself, she was positive for meth. So how can that be possible? So I thought in my head, what I thought is they tamper with the tests.
That has certainly happened. There were people at I think it's Massachusetts State Crime Lab, who were just making things positive or contaminating things and on purpose skewing the results. A lot of the cases I see are just substandard laboratory practices.
Right.
And so, for example, if you're using gas chromatography to run, 50 samples, you have to mix in blanks in there. And some of them don't put blanks because you want to show that 0 is 0.
Right.
And you want to put blanks, you want to put calibrators, you also want to put reference samples mixed all in there. So imagine, say, 100 vials that you're going to be testing. It's very easy for them to get mixed up, taken out of the wrong order, or, because the instrument doesn't really know what it's testing. It has to go by the information you put in.
Wow. So, but it can be possible. It can be possible that it can be tinted. It can be fabricated, correct?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Or it can just be substandard, laboratory practices.
Right. I spoke about that with Attorney Davis. He thought it's more accurate and what have you, but there's a lot of whistleblowers that's coming out more and more exposing the system, exposing the drug facilities. Because why do they have to go to their own drug facility? To me, that's a red flag to me. Because if you get money, right, from the federal government for stealing children, if you get, funded for that, why does it have to be in the DCFS facility to do the drug testing? And to me, like I said, it's a red flag. So what is your so what about when the mother is in the hospital delivering C-section? And I just got that call about a month ago. And she's never done drugs, nothing at all. But they gave her something for pain because of the shot, and they give her something else that she got rashes from, she was allergic to. Then one of the nurses reported her to CPS that she's using drugs, and the urine or the baby, something happened, or the baby's doesn't have drugs in the system, but the mom does. So it's kind of fishy and weird. So what do you think happens during that process, and all of a sudden they have drugs?
So the baby's circulatory system is connected to the mother's. So if it's present in the mother's, it wouldn't make sense that it's not present in the baby unless it just plain wasn't there. And let me know when you want to talk about hair testing.
That's next. Hair
Okay.
testing is coming up next. Okay. And so basically the hair testing. If the mother has short hair, I think the hair has to be a certain length. Like my hair would be fine, right? To do, to take
Yes.
a big patch from it. But some parents, for example, they have really short hair. So the social worker automatically assumes that the parent literally deliberately cut her hair that short so they wouldn't be able to do hair follicle test. What are your thoughts about that? What is the whole hair follicle test? If you can just explain it to us.
Okay, so in legal circles, it's called the hair follicle test. In scientific or laboratory circles, it is just called hair testing because you're not actually testing the follicle. Now, there are many differences, especially with ethnic minorities who their hair absorbs and does not wash out drugs as much as others. And there are people that what the literature says use ethnic hair care products, which cause false positives. There is a case, and you guys can probably find this one. It's called Jones versus City of Boston, I believe. And I believe it was a class action by the African American Boston police officers because they all kept testing positive for drugs and getting fired or suspended. And they had a good point that they're saying African American hair holds on to drugs, and no matter how many washes, you can't get it out. Now, hair testing has a whole lot of other issues. One of them is there's no standardized method for how often the hair should be washed and what it's washed with before you run the test. because you don't want something that's, on the surface. And drugs are generally everywhere. First, if you've had a drug problem anytime in the past, or anyone you lived with, your whole environment is contaminated with drugs. Now, even if you haven't, circulated money, which the first thing they usually have you do in an analytical chemistry class is they have you take your own dollar out of your wallet and then extract all the drugs and look at what's in there. And generally speaking, you find every single drug of abuse on the money. And so, for example, if someone works as a bartender, they may be getting cash tips or something, and then you touch your hair, it can end up in the hair. And but hair testing, there's a company that does all the misinformation about how reliable it is. I testified against them in a Kelly Fry hearing, but it's hair testing is very fallible. As far as the short hair, I have seen people do that. The more common method is to bleach your hair. That makes it far more likely to not be positive, and to conceal what they're doing. They bleach the hair several times, so the hair almost looks like it's going to fall out, and then they dye it back to the color they naturally were. And so you show up and, it looks normal. They're developing tests. I've seen one paper on it where they can use analytical methods to determine if it's been treated with anything. But that's there was a doctor in Colorado who got in trouble who was using drugs, and he was a dark-haired man, and showed up to work the day they were drug testing with orange hair. And that was sort of a giveaway. Like, why is a physician who's 60 dyeing his hair orange? But someone could suppose that he's trying to manipulate a test. All the tests, generally speaking, have ways of manipulation, and there is an entire industry dedicated to beating drug testing. And so if you Google online and how to, be clean, there are people, and they spend an extraordinary amount of time working on ways to defeat the tests. And they, if they did anything constructive, they would probably be NASA engineers. But for example, they come up with things like the websites will sell urine. They sell clean urine online.
What?
Yeah. And then you take the clean urine. In some scenarios, for example, a female would put it in her bra so it stays at her body temperature. So the temperature is consistent with produced urine when you step out the bathroom, and they take the temperature. That's one method. There are other methods, mostly for men, that are you use fake genitals to do the testing. The most enterprising people, they actually they will take the urine. Okay, so they'll evacuate their bladder just before a test. And one way is just to dilute, you want to dilute the sample as much as possible if you want to defeat it. But another method that seems a little too common is people buy the urine online, and you can buy catheters online. And so they evacuate the bladder, insert the catheter, and then pour the clean urine in to their bladder. And so there's no examination that the collection facility can do to establish that this is their own urine. It just.
Oh my God, that's disgusting. I'm so sorry. I'm just to hear you say those things. Wow. um. Okay.
I have a question.
Wow.
Let's say I have a CPS mother,
Ooh.
okay, and that's my client, and we're in CPS court because she somehow tested positive
Mhm,
for meth at the time of birth.
mhm.
I'm going to ask you, and she tells me, hey, there's no way I could test positive. I don't do meth.
Yep.
And at the time of birth, they gave her a urine test. Who knows if it was a screen or a confirming test? I've only seen that recently one time, Corey, where they said they took a screen and then they did a confirming test. And that wasn't that wasn't in Los Angeles. That was up north. So, what is my best argument in defense for that mother?
So if it's done at the hospital, just about 99% of the time, it's a screening test. Hospitals, if somebody, let's say, comes into the emergency room, they're on limited time. So they can't do the expensive, laboratory testing that takes forever. For example, at some laboratories I've worked at, we would always set up the samples and then have the instrument run overnight when we weren't there. So it does take a long time, and the person could potentially be dead or in worse shape if you have to wait that long. So they do a screening test, and it's unfortunate because in many scenarios, there will someone will fall in a slip and fall or something, and they say, oh, their BAC was a 0.35, and those tests are horribly flawed, the hospital blood tests. I've actually published papers about them. They're really bad.
Yeah.
There's so many false positives.
Yeah.
I almost wouldn't know where to start.
But with respect to the screen, I mean, if the paperwork says it was a drug screen, okay, most people, attorneys, maybe judges, assume that means they tested positive for methamphetamine, D-methamphetamine. Who knows? You know, you're the first person that I've heard give me a clear description of legal meth and illegal meth. Because a lot of people say, well, I was taking some type of over-the-counter medication, right?
Mhm.
So what do I do with respect to challenging that in court?
Challenging the screen.
Yes.
Okay, so for the screen, in good laboratory practice, if it comes out positive, if you absolutely need to know, the hospital sends it to another lab that can do confirmatory testing and has the right instruments. And that step should be taken before somebody's incarcerated or loses their kids over.
But that doesn't happen.
Right. And the other thing is,
Wow.
they don't send it out, and
See?
so the amount of false positives associated with screening tests, because the test, it's hopefully not going to have any false negatives, but it can have a lot of false positives because you want to cast a wide net. You just want to be able to screen out some of them that you don't need to do the confirmatory testing on.
But what's the legal argument?
I can send you, afterwards, I can send you a forensic textbook excerpt that explains that, and it says in bold, no scientist should ever go into court and say something was present in a specimen or sample based solely on a screening test. And I've used that one a lot because most scientific textbooks don't state things that strongly, like no scientist should ever, but this one does. It's by DiMaio, Dimaio, and the other author is Fox, and there's a forensic pathology handbook and a textbook, if I recall correctly. But yes, you're right that lawyers always assume that a hospital test is accurate.
See?
After all, it's a hospital. So one case I had,
Told you, Vincent.
the person was injured because he was run over by a UPS truck. When they called me, he had been in a coma for 2 years, and the case didn't settle in the 2 years because UPS and their attorney were banking on the fact that he had a positive urine drug screen.
Wow.
So they hired me, and this is another point, to take the deposition of the laboratory director. I promise you, that is the only person you want to depose. Lawyers and the general public assume that the person who's running the instrument is the most knowledgeable.
Yep.
They simply aren't. It's just like if you wanted to have an MRI done, the radiologist isn't going to get paid $1,000 an hour to sit there and run an instrument you could have somebody do for $20 an hour. Or doctors don't draw the blood usually. They send it to the lab. They don't even know where the lab is, or care. So always depose the laboratory director if you're deposing anybody. In this case, he was an MD and a PhD, and it's rare, but of all the medical examiners, pathologists, and everything, it's rare, but he knew everything. And so I brought a whole bunch of papers with, different kinds of false positives. And I showed him textbooks and asked him if he agreed, because it's a lot harder to disagree with textbooks and such. And by the end of the deposition, I had decimated the test completely. The UPS attorney's first question was, well, why do hospitals even do these tests? Because it was that bad.
Yeah.
And the case settled for $10.5 million a week later. I got $4,000. $10.5 million. I got $4,000.
Okay, here's a question for you. And this was the actual case maybe a year or so ago. I actually represent the dad, but another friend of mine represented the mom. The mom had a baby, newborn, their first baby. The mom's urinalysis was clean. The child's urinalysis was clean. However, they claim that is it called the Marconium?
Marconium.
Yeah.
There was traces of cocaine, right? Or whatever tested to be possibly cocaine. So now what a lot of doctors are doing, a lot of hospitals on the newborn, they're sending that Marconium off to be tested, and before they were just doing the urine, but now in my mind, they're doing it to catch more cases for whatever reason and, make that money. But what is the defense for that?
If they're sending it out to a laboratory, they're probably doing a confirming test, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that there are many people with all kinds of positive drug tests who have very plausible denials. In one case, for example, the kids were ages 2 and 4. And the kid's hair tested positive for a lot of methamphetamine.
Oh.
Well, the parents were completely negative. And so I think the number of drug people who would, buy, meth would take it themselves. I mean, they don't touch the stuff, but they give it to their 2-year-old and 4-year-old. It just doesn't make sense. Those are really the type of credible denials. Or someone has a positive hair test, but they've been taking a urine test every day. It should be in the urine then.
So
Wow.
what's the defense? I mean, it has to be, I guess, expert testimony then.
Yes, and if you go to, I just made this easy so I don't have to always find it and send it to attorneys. If you go to discoveryrequest.com, there's no S on the end, just discoveryrequest.com. I have a list of things to ask for from the laboratory, and a explanation of each one, why we actually have to have it. Now, laboratories always act so burdened and want so much money just to give you the information. This information is so, fundamental and absolutely necessary that it has to be readily on hand. It's sort of like if you call an attorney and he says, well, I don't know how to look up a case or something, it's that bad. So always serve the discovery request. And a lot of time it's government, and government laboratories are generally substandard. For example, they have way less, way less reliable instruments and methodologies. For example, the laboratories at UCLA's chemistry department are, top of the line. And anywhere in industry, the pharmaceutical industry, or anywhere else, the testing is top of the line. But when it comes to criminal cases or taking away kids, the government gets away with a lot of substandard instruments. So my opinion is that you should always serve the discovery request, because if it's properly responded to, you will get 1,200 pages, and you want to give government, incompetent government people enough rope to hang themselves.
Yep.
So if you have 1,500 pages and it's government, I doubt it was done correctly. I mean, they'd have to pass a lot of scrutiny. And there are issues, for example, one of the discovery requests asks for the written method. And that is where the laboratory validates that this test works to detect, whatever drug. So in many cases in Riverside and Orange County, sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was I just saying?
You were talking about testing and validating testing.
Oh, yes.
In Orange
Okay.
County.
Yeah. So their validations and methods do not contain a test to make sure, for example, that marijuana is present, THC is present, or CBD. And CBD has almost the identical structure and same molecular mass as THC. When you use the best instrument for telling these things apart, use a mass spectrometer, and the mass spectrometer is sort of like, say the whole molecule is a plate, you throw it on the floor and see what size fragments you get, all the way through. Well, if it has the same, molecular mass, it's like throwing the same plate, and then you're going to get, exactly the same results, even though it's not a THC. So the laboratory must prove that their method does distinguish between CBD and THC.
But I thought CBD was not a drug. I mean, CBD isn't CBD oil from
Yes, it's over the counter. It's everywhere.
yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, why would they see that as a drug? And I'm sorry to interrupt you, Vincent. It was on.
Okay. So if you're looking at the molecules, if you look online and you search for molecular structure of THC and CBD,
Right.
they're almost exactly the same. And the most reliable for telling these things apart are based on the molecular mass, or how much the molecule weighs. And any molecular mass has the potential of fragmenting in the same place as anything else with the same molecular mass. So you have to be able to tell those apart. This applies only to marijuana, but it's, unfortunate that a lot of government labs don't have, validated methods for distinguishing the two. And a lot of these drugs that they, like CBD, is in all kinds of over-the-counter things that people don't even know. And there's this stuff, I think some people call it herbal Viagra. It's not herbal and it's not Viagra, but it has things in it like CBD all the time. So
Oh my God.
A lot of people don't even know they're even taking it.
See, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Vincent.
If I send out the questionnaire or the discovery request at discoveryrequest.com, and I discover or I find out that their testing is somehow flawed in many different ways, does that mean that their testing doesn't qualify under Kelly Fry and it should not be considered by the court?
Right. Kelly Fry, in the cases I've worked on, is a little difficult because I believe, and you can tell me, one of the first issues is whether this is a new or novel method. And a lot of labs just stick with, well, this isn't a new method, so we don't need to do Kelly Fry. It's been around 50 years, but that doesn't mean it's right or correct, What's the other part of the question?
If they don't fill out the checklist or meet the checklist, are they automatically disqualified under Kelly Fry?
I don't believe they are automatically, because I keep having to go to hearings on whether they should actually come in. And the only ones I know about are the cases where the judge actually allowed a hearing. But a lot of times they just say, oh, well, it's been around for however long, and, we're just going to allow it in, and we don't go any further into it.
That almost seems to be like an automatic appeal or writ.
You would think, but the people who get abused the most don't have as much access to lawyers, appellate lawyers,
Money.
and hiring experts and having laboratory testing done or getting drug tested every day. They just don't have the option. So the majority of them give up because they don't have any more options.
See, that's what I was telling you, Vincent. They do it deliberately to steal children for profit. And they know who to target. They do know who to target. Because there's a lot of celebrities who do drugs. Like literally on screen, they're doing drugs. They're smoking marijuana. They're doing cocaine, but they still have their children. How come these children are not removed? Because they have the financial means to go against the county with no problem. But the ones who are being targeted, they're going to have to pay a lot. Deposition, then they would have to pay to hire Mr. Okori. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. And then hire an attorney like you, and both of you guys combined together is going to cost a lot.
Well, let me ask you this. In order to hire, a drug testing expert to come in and testify about you know, the requirements, what you found, what the report's missing, all that type of stuff to challenge a positive drug test or drug screen,
Mhm.
what would it cost me to hire you as an expert?
So challenging the drug screen results, typically you wouldn't have to do really any discovery to establish that it's a screen.
Mhm.
The methodology would give it away. In other cases, the counties have paid me, and it varies drastically, $2,000 to $40,000 for one case. So it's not necessarily going to be cheap, and there's so many documents to scrutinize and everything. I believe it would be at least $4,000
Okay.
just to get started.
Okay. Darren, did you have any questions for our expert?
But I have one more question before Darren goes. Um, is it possible that you would that parents can get mm, I don't know how meth works. I'm still new to the drug arena. But methamphetamine, for example, for example, if the neighbor is cooking it, I think it can be cooked or something, and and it goes in the air or goes in the water or something like that. Would that be also a way to it goes through your skin or something? Like it absorbs through your skin? Is that true? Or
There's a lot of theories on why that happens,
yeah.
but again, a lot of people have very credible denials that this is what happened. And anybody that handles money is potentially going to have, you know, drugs on their hands, their
Oh my God.
hair, just like the Boston police officers. They have to handle drugs all the time, and their hair just holds on to the drug.
Oh my God. This is a nightmare.
Yeah,
Darren?
I mean, to me, the one of the most important things to do is, well, if the person has the resources, um, you want to first wash the hair as much as possible, and then do your own test right after that.
Okay.
And if you wash it like 30 times or something, it's a lot less likely to be false positive as
Wow.
opposed to not washing it. But if the person has the resources, I recommend you do all the testing on your own and see where you're at. And then if you do have time and the money, then you do the one for the government.
Okay.
You know, when I Google drug testing facility, like if I want to send a client out to go do a drug test or do urinalysis or hair follicle, are they doing just the screen or are they doing the full test? Or it depends?
Yeah, typical lawyer answer, it depends.
Okay.
And it's I would the report produced by the laboratory should absolutely make it clear what technology they were using to run the test.
Wow. That's amazing.
Usually they don't do, there's no information like that in the social workers report. It's just that, hey, Davis tested positive at the time of, whatever.
Right, they must be doing drugs or
You
something.
know, and I have seen the term L-meth. I don't think I've ever seen D-meth, but I have seen the term L-meth. But they treated it as if, oh, you're a meth head.
Yeah.
You're using an illegal methamphetamine.
Yeah.
Darren, go ahead with your questions, please.
Yeah, there we go. So I guess because you guys had a lot of information that you went through, but so overall, in most cases, it says that judges can't order these hair follicle tests, nor can a caseworker. Now, why is there such scrutiny on those tests? Because I noticed a lot of ways that they're getting around these tests, or they're having a guardian ad litem. But why are judges and the caseworkers, the DHS themselves, trying to push themselves away from that hair follicle test? Like, what are I know, like false positive, why, like you've gone over this. I'm just looking for, I mean, judges and caseworkers are staying away from this also, or they're actually not even allowed to ask for these tests. What is the reasoning for that? Is that because they're so inaccurate and there are so many ways that the hair is volatile? Like, would you consider the hair follicle tests like null and void at any point?
I would recommend it in very limited applications. For example, if somebody believes they were drugged and raped a month ago, then I'd say the hair testing, and then you'd look for benzodiazepine type compounds. It's like half an inch a month that they measure, and you can hopefully narrow down the time. I guess it depends what jurisdiction, because hair testing is still going on all the time for a whole lot of different applications. I believe it might be different in family law, but I'm not positive.
Have you ever heard of a rule in California that hair follicle testing, court-ordered hair follicle testing, is not proper? That it's an unreasonable violation of your privacy?
No, I've actually never heard that before.
Darren, go ahead. Next question.
Okay, yeah. So my other thing is there anything telltale that you can do if you were looking for manipulation in urine screens or false positives? Is there any like telltale signs that you could say that you would say, look, this caseworker is definitely messed with something, or someone along the lines? Like I know Mr. Davis and I were talking about like the chain of command or the chain of command, or I think that's what we called it, but like chain of custody. Yeah, right. So from this person to this person to this person. But is there anything that you've seen in your profession that you're like, wow, they do this, they're getting away with screwing with people like this all the time? Is there anything that you can say that's a noticeable like slam dunk, I guess, if you will? I know Mr. Davis don't like to use that word, but
evidence that the test is being manipulated. Right. There's almost no way, except for possibly catching the person red-handed, and because the urine temperature isn't correct, or you can tell they're using some device other than their genitals to produce the urine or something, but it's very difficult. And I just wanted to mention, imagine 100 test tubes and each one's going into the instrument. It's so easy to mix things up. And so we've had cases where people were positive for something. They were absolutely positive they were not. Well, absolutely sure they were not. And we had, for example, a blood test done. And I usually start with a blood type test because, it's a lot cheaper than DNA, but it turns out not to be the person's sample that was tested or was read on the instrument. Just imagine if you're holding 100 test tubes, how careful you have to be to make sure each one inputted into the instrument is the exact one that it should be.
Right. Well, and I wasn't meaning so much for the person, because I know, like there's creatine levels that they test for. Well, the UPass urine has figured out how to beat those, like the UPass urines themselves. Like, so definitely there's an argument. I mean, if you're worried about failing a drug test, you just have to do some research and put some money out and you will pass a drug test. What I'm talking about is for caseworkers, or is there things that they slide beside, and that's what, like you say, like, no, that caseworker did something fishy here. Like for me, for instance, the place that I got tested, they take 2 samples when you go, so you had one in case there's an error. They have 72 hours to test the second sample. Well, in my case, they disregarded that. And then they just came out and said that my urine screens were positive. Well, little did they know that I had a good friend at the lab that actually gave me my urine screens and said that they absolutely were not. And of course, they couldn't produce the transcript and all of this, and so on and so forth. And then I didn't screen or whatever. But is there anything that you see that would make you pop your eyes out at? I'm talking about from the state side of testings, that you'd be like, they're doing something wrong, they're doing something to manipulate these people. In that sense, that's kind of what I was more looking for. because criminals are always going to win. We know that. Like they're going to find their ways. But as far as the caseworkers themselves, false positive, maybe not testing things properly or writing things down wrong, or like, what do you see in that side?
The caseworkers and social workers, to me, part of their job is they have to be vigilant for things, but they jump on things so quickly and make so many assertions. They have one sheet of paper from the lab, which doesn't tell you a whole lot, and you're telling your judge this person's doing drugs while pregnant or something. That's the biggest problem with them. And for example, in Orange County, the other huge problem is they're using screening tests, which is.
Now, what's the difference between a screening test and then the other way? Like, what is like the major difference? And is it like one's quick, one's more sent out to the lab, diagnosed, taken apart, piece by piece type deal?
Yeah, so a screening test is like when the cops find drugs and they want to test it and find out in 30 seconds if it could be drugs. And then it's, sent off to the lab. The lab testing takes far longer. So, what's the other part of the question?
We were close, I think, right there with that answer. I think we were pretty good. But so I guess what I wanted to know then, as far as when you send it to the lab, how long does this stuff stay good in these lab conditions? I mean, I know that for drugs and their molecular structures have to like sit at perfect temperature. I mean, with COVID, we had stuff sitting in those labs for months and months, in the past. Like, the drugs and all of that stuff in the urine and any of those things, do they all keep their integrity for those long periods of time? Or, I mean, are you looking at a dilution like very quickly in these systems?
So the sample stability, almost all drugs are relatively stable in blood, but with alcohol in blood, there's a huge problem with the microbes like fungi and bacteria that convert the blood contents, such as glucose, into, alcohol. And so it's going to show up like the same kind of alcohol. You're going to think the person has a lot of alcohol.
Right, it's going to be huge through the roof.
Right. And,
they blew a 0.93 and it's not even possible.
Yeah. Right. And the social workers always say, well, it was properly stored. Well, so what? Like milk, when you go to the store to buy it, biological compounds change once they're outside the body. So you always get the one with the latest expiration date.
Right.
It's properly stored.
Right.
That doesn't mean it lasts forever.
Right. Exactly.
You can only slow down those changes. You can't really stop them. The other issue with alcohol is the DCFS and other government people are used to, well, they're programmed to, laboratories and everything testify that there is sodium fluoride in the blood sample, which is a preservative. And so it stops fermentation. Well, sodium fluoride does stop fermentation of all the microbes except the one you have all over your hair, skin, body, brain, Candida albicans, which is a fungi. When Candida albicans is present, fermentation occurs faster than it does when the sodium fluoride isn't present. The theory is that the sodium fluoride neutralizes, all the other microbes or stops them from functioning, and then it gives the Candida free reign. And I often cite to a paper where they talk about industrial alcohol production, and they use sodium fluoride to increase the amount of alcohol they get and the speed